Hello, everyone. Today I will be telling you about Marcus Tullius Cicero. My name is Kyler. Alexander will be down in the discussion with you guys, going over the discussion questions after the presentation. So once I'm done here telling you about Cicero, feel free to go down there and answer the discussion questions that Alexander will have for you, and we'll be guiding you through those as well. So to start things off, the history of Cicero. Cicero was born January 3rd, 106, and died December of 43 BCE. More is known about Cicero than any other Roman figure in a long time. Scholars saying no one else in antiquity is as well known, with Julius Caesar and the Emperor Julian far behind. He's well known for a couple of reasons. First, he loved to talk about himself, whether that be in his public speeches, his addresses, or letters that were private to other people, or from letters that were from people to him. They all love to talk about Cicero. His artifacts are also really well preserved. 58 of 106 of his public addresses, so a little over half, are still around, as well as 800 letters from him to other people and from people to him. And all those things, he likes to talk about himself a lot. So there's a lot known about him through those works. And then also 6 of his books on rhetoric are still around, as well as parts of 7 on philosophy. The ones on philosophy aren't all complete, but you can still get a pretty good idea of who he was through those works, even though they're not all there. So let's talk about his work. Starting off with De Inventione, written around 87 BCE, when Cicero was just 19 years old. So he was super young still, and he's doing really important work. So this was the first attempt to bring Greek philosophy into a rhetorical theory that Romans could understand. The issue in the time was that there's a lack of terms translating from Greek to Latin for the Romans to understand. So the issue was that only the high-ups, the rulers in the Roman Republic, were able to understand things that the Greeks were teaching through philosophy and rhetoric. So this work, created terms from Greek to Latin. Cicero had a talent to bring work into light that the Roman people were able to understand by creating terms and using terms in Latin to be able to understand what the Greeks are saying. It was a very technical work because not only was there a lot of new terms in it, but it was largely made up of Cicero's notes. There wasn't a whole lot of official work in it. It was a lot of his notes that he converted into the work in order to bring light from Greek rhetoric into Latin so that the Roman people could understand it. Next is, I'm going to butcher this name, Rhetorica ad Arnemia, the second of Cicero's works. This one followed closely after De Inventione. And it also works with Greek rhetoric written into Latin by a Roman for Romans. It was used for many years to follow, as it was kind of the first of its kind. It was more of a continuation of his first work, and it was used for years to teach the ways of the Greek rhetoric into Latin so that the Romans could understand it. And the big part of it being able to be translated into Latin is then it could be translated into many other languages, as it was easier to translate from Latin into other languages. So these two works put together kind of irritated the ruling class because it was a form of education that they usually only got. They were the only ones that knew some form of Greek and were learning about the Greek rhetoric. But Cicero was taking and teaching the Greek rhetoric to other people, to young people in the Roman Empire or the Roman Republic, so that they could, be better orators and better speakers to have some form of education for themselves. Next, we talk about Cicero's 5 canons, which is another really important part of his work that he did. He did a lot of important things, but this is another one on the list that we'll be talking about in today's presentation that was really important. So the canons shaped speaking ability for orators. They taught the orators how to speak effectively, and they gave the orators somewhat of a system to kind of follow off, kind of a blueprint, so that they had something better to form their speaking and make their speeches and addresses better. So it starts with the invention, which is pretty straightforward. It's the idea of developing a valid argument. It's making sure that the argument that you're starting with is a good starting point and something that's worth creating an address or an argument or a speech about. Second is arrangement. This one's also pretty straightforward. It's ordering things in an effective manner, whether that be chronologically or however works best for the topic you're speaking on. Next is expression, which was a big one, using proper language within the argument to make the argument more valid, to make the argument come across better and stronger. Fourth is one that's kind of interesting in today's world that we wouldn't normally think of, which is memory. Cicero really encouraged his orators and people learning about his topics to do their speaking and addresses all from memory. He encouraged not to use many note cards, if any note cards at all, and to give long speeches and whatnot, all through memory. Finally is delivery, which is controlling your voice, your body language, and other things to make your address more effective and really get your point across, drive it home. Next is de orator. Cicero was banished in 58 BC because there was a senator who was trying to overthrow the Roman Republic, and Cicero exposed his plot, and that kind of irritated them. So he was banished from the Roman Republic. He quickly returned, though, a year later when he retired to his estate in 55 BCE after he was back for a few years, and he wrote De Orator. This was a response to Plato's criticism on Gorgias, and everyone contributes in this rhetoric rather than fighting over what rhetoric is. So a lot of times in rhetoric, or a lot of times in these works, they fight over what rhetoric really is. Cicero set out to create a work that everybody was on the same page, that everybody worked together to create a deeper definition of rhetoric and to create a deeper meaning of what rhetoric was. The book sets out to reunite the tongue and the brain, creating great speakers. So by this, they're talking about it was set out to reconnect the tongue and the brain, and by doing so, creating better work by making sure that you're thinking about what you're saying and having a greater understanding about what rhetoric is and what you're talking about. You can have the words that come out of your mouth be stronger. It covers things such as audience, so who you're addressing and how your work can change based on who you're addressing. Orator qualities, what you can change about yourself and what you can do within yourself being the orator to improve your speaking. And it covered humor, which is a really interesting one because humor was something that was a real difficult topic to cover during addresses, speeches, whatever it may be, during rhetoric in general. And Cicero actually encouraged humor as long as there was dignity within your humor. So a lot of other theorists pushed away from humor, but Cicero encouraged it and said that as long as there was dignity within your humor, you could use humor and use it effectively during your rhetoric. Moving on to the end, Cicero sadly had a quick ending to his life. Throughout his life, he had a hostile relationship with Caesar. Tensions were high between consuls and Senate members, and this was a rough time. So Caesar returned in 49 BCE, invaded his own country, and then shut down the Roman courts, forcing Cicero to retire because that's who he worked for. And by shutting down the courts, there was nothing left for him to do. In 44 BCE, Caesar was killed, and not long after Caesar was killed, the order was given to kill Cicero. His head and hands were hung above the podium as an example, like Dr. T said in the beginning of this discussion. Cicero was brutally murdered for his teachings, and there was a lot of tensions, a lot of people that didn't like what he was doing in general. So he was murdered and made an example out of. To wrap things up, Cicero did lead a very successful life. A lot of the work that he did was very groundbreaking and allowed for rhetoric to be taught to the Roman Republic in a younger age, in a younger way, or in a better way, in order to bring light to what rhetoric was without having to be very, very high up a ruler or a high class. He fought banishment and high tension with Roman rulers constantly throughout his life, but he pushed through it, making some amazing work, such as his 5 canons or De Orator. Cicero played a very important role in bringing rhetoric into a language that was able to be understood by somebody other than rulers. And without Cicero, there's no telling where things may be. So Cicero led a very important life, and through this, he taught a lot of people a lot of things that normally people would not get to know without his amazing works. So go ahead and go down in the discussion, and Alexander will lead you through the discussion questions.